Have you recently lost a sale to a larger consultancy? Maybe it was one of the big four. Maybe it was a company with more people, a fancier website, or a stronger reputation behind them. And your best guess for why you didn't win the deal? Probably budget, maybe their name, the fact that they looked more established. I want to show you why that diagnosis is almost certainly wrong. Because a client of mine, a specialist running just a 2-person business, she literally just won a near 6-figure piece of strategic work and the full implementation contract. And the buyer had already brought in one of the big four and probably paid them mega money. And they got a report back that was so broad, it was honestly useless. So they made a second call to the specialist, to the business owner, where it's her brand. Yes, she's international, but she doesn't have a global presence. She's only 3 or 4 years in business, and she's literally walked away with everything. That's not a fluke. That's what happens when your positioning is clear enough that a buyer who's already been burned by broad knows exactly who to reach out to next. So if you've been losing work to bigger firms and telling yourself it was the price or the reputation, stay with me, because beating the big agencies is not what you think it is. Now, I have to acknowledge the frustration first, the frustration that comes when you're a cybersecurity founder who's just lost a sale to a bigger company. You probably have a stronger track record than the company that won it. You probably even get genuinely better client outcomes. You're better on delivery because it's you, the founder, and you care more. You're probably doing work that actually gets used rather than filed away like that big four company did. You'll probably even have more real experience on the ground than the consultants the big four put on the project. And it's so freaking frustrating that clients still choose them. So I have to acknowledge that. What doesn't get said out loud is, what's the point of being so fucking good if nobody can see it? You may not know this yet, but that's a category problem. It's when a buyer opens a shortlist and they can't immediately see why you're different. So their brain does the only thing it knows what to do. It picks the familiar name because familiar is safe and safe is the path of least resistance. When dropping a big four name in the board meeting on a Friday morning makes the person who hired them look impressive for choosing them. You're losing because you're comparable. And comparable always loses to well-known and famous. Maybe you've even seen the default advice out there. When you're losing to bigger companies, get better credentials, look more established, sharpen up your website. And I completely understand the instinct. But buyers right now are overwhelmed. Research on executive decision-making is consistent. The more options that look similar, the more likely the brain is to default to the safest, most familiar option. And if your proposal looks like or reads like a broad capability list, yours and the big fours lands in the same mental category of your buyer. It's the equivalent of you being on the same shelf in the supermarket side by side. So you get compared the same. On that shelf, the bigger company and the well-known brand name is always going to win, even if they're more expensive. The buyer who called my client had already been looking at that shelf and he'd bought the big name, he got the broad report, and it didn't move anything for him. That's when he rang the specialist who wasn't even on the shelf in the first instance. You see, getting off the shelf entirely, that's the goal. And I get that sometimes it's hard to see your own situation clearly when you've been in the same industry for years. It's literally the curse of knowledge. You know too much about how your industry works to be able to actually see how a buyer experiences it from the outside. So before I show you an example or two, let me explain what's actually happening strategically. There's a type of strategy called being a challenger brand. And that means not necessarily being the biggest or having the most resources. It's like not trying to win by being better at the same game as the market leader. It's by changing the game entirely or coming at it from an entirely different strategy. So when a brand does this, they identify the rules everybody else in their industry follows, and then they break one of them deliberately. Not in a reckless way, in a deliberate, intentional way. And by doing that, they remove themselves from direct comparison with the people who should, on paper, fucking crush them. That is brand strategy in action. It's a structural business decision to outmaneuver competitors. And it works because the market leader can't copy it without destroying what makes them the market leader. So it's really smart. Let me show you one of my favorite brands to demonstrate this with from completely outside your industry. You're going to be like, what the fuck, Deirdre? But stick with me. Liquid Death is this brand. Liquid Death sells water, but as you know, you can get water from Evian, San Pellegrino, any supermarket owned brand, any vending machine anywhere in the world probably sells even local water brands. And yet nobody compares Liquid Death to any of those, not in their mind, not in any conversation anyone has about any of the brands. And here's why. Every water brand on the market, except for Liquid Death, they compete on the same things: purity, source, health credentials, maybe even sustainability. And yeah, that's the game that they're playing. Evian plays it, San Pellegrino plays it, even the supermarkets play it too, just at the budget end. Liquid Death looked at that game and completely refused to enter it. Instead, they asked a different question. Who else is thirsty? Who else is thirsty that the big water brands are completely ignoring? And then they did something nobody in the category would do or even thought to do. Instead of bottling their water, they put it in cans. They used gothic writing and language like murder your thirst. Even more recently, they run a campaign declaring that parenting is the world's most extreme sport. Like, what the fuck? The ad parodies MMA broadcasts. Parents enter an octagon to battle toddlers who are actually full-grown MMA fighters dressed as babies. Changing a nappy becomes a heavyweight bout. Buckling a car seat is a combat sport. It is. Surviving a toddler headbutt gets ESPN commentary, and then they activated it. They invited parents to submit sponsor me videos explaining why they deserved athletic sponsorship, and the winners got a year's supply of product and merchandise credit. Think about what they did there. Energy drinks brands usually sponsor motocross riders and MMA fighters, and I'm even thinking Red Bull and Formula One, whereas Liquid Death looked at that convention and asked, who else has taken as much physical and mental punishment as a professional athlete that nobody is speaking to? Exhausted parents who arguably need the caffeine more, and they didn't change their product. Now, granted, this was for a sparkling water campaign. It's still water, but they changed who they were comparing themselves to. And in doing that, they made the comparison with those brands, Evian, San Pellegrino, completely irrelevant. The buyer's brain files Liquid Death alongside energy drinks, even though it's just water. Maybe a brand of trainers, a band they like, that's where it gets filed. The comparison with other water brands, it never even starts because the brain just doesn't put them in the same drawer. That's the move. Make the comparison impossible, not just harder. Now, I know what you're thinking, Deirdre, that's a consumer brand. I run a cybersecurity consultancy. I'm talking hacks and threats and data and regulation. Fair enough. I get it. But I want you to think about it like this. When a cyber founder leads with, we provide comprehensive cybersecurity services for businesses of all sizes, they've literally just put themselves in the same row as KPMG on the buyer's spreadsheet, and spreadsheets sort by price. The founders who stop losing to bigger businesses own a position so specific that a big four firm structurally cannot copy it. A company billing thousands of partners cannot say, we only work with mid-market fintech companies going through their first regulatory audit. That sentence would disqualify most of their pipeline. Their size is their cage, and that allows you to walk through doors that they can never fit through. So how do you know if you've actually stepped off that spreadsheet or just reworded the same broad position with slightly different language? This is where the category test comes in. I use a concept with founders around zigging and zagging. So when everyone in your market is moving towards the same broad capability statement, they're all zigging in one direction. So finding your zag is what separates you. So the category test is how you find it. And it sounds simple, but zagging is not easy. You literally answer 3 questions and you run your current positioning through all of them. So question 1, for example, would be, could a big four firm say this without losing any of their clients? And if yes, you're still on the buyer spreadsheet being compared on price. If they could say, we help business improve their cybersecurity posture. KPMG says a version of that every day. We help regulated financial services firms map their third-party risk exposure before an audit window closes. A big firm, a big four firm, can't say that. It's too narrow, too committed to one problem. It disqualifies most of their pipeline. They can't say that, you see, and that's the difference. Question 2 would be, does your positioning leave someone out? Good positioning means something specific to the right buyer and very little to the wrong one. The specialist I mentioned earlier is not for every company. She's not trying to be. And the buyer who rang her knew immediately she was exactly right for their situation. She had deep expertise in their industry with the problem that they were looking to solve. That only happens when what you say is bold enough to also repel who it's not for. And that brings us to question 3. When the right buyer reads it, do they lean in or do they keep scrolling past? Not whether it sounds good, whether the person you actually want to work with stops, reads it again and thinks, this person gets it. When that registers, they stop comparing you against a shortlist. They start figuring out how to get you on a call, and the cognitive load drops, which makes decision to work with you easier. And price then becomes irrelevant because you're no longer in the same category as the people they'd normally compare on price. So none of those 3 questions are about how many certifications you have, what's your head count, or how many years have you been in the industry. They're all about clarity of position, because the buyer who called my client, they weren't looking for the biggest consultancy. They'd already been there, done that. He was looking for someone who understood his specific problem, and he found her. So 2 things I see founders do when they hear this, and both miss the point. The first is niching, but staying in the same category. So saying something like cybersecurity for small businesses, that sounds specific, but 100 other consultancies could say that. So it's not just the big 4 you're competing with, it's other competitors at a similar level to you. And a big 4 subsidiary probably could say a version of that too, if you were being really honest. So specificity means the right buyer reads it and thinks, that's me. Cybersecurity for small businesses doesn't do that. Governance systems for financial services firms going through their first NIS2 audit, who need the work delivered without the founder running every session. That does, right? One is a market segment, the other is a position. And the second mistake is identifying your bold positioning and then hedging it, softening it, being careful with what you do with it before it goes anywhere, because I get it, a bold position feels risky. What if it puts someone off? A soft position puts off the right buyers unintentionally, yet constantly though. That's the thing, because they scroll past. They're looking for someone who gets their specific situation, someone who's a bit different and focused. They just don't tell you that that's why they've scrolled past. And often it's because they can't even recognize it or name it themselves. It happens so quickly and so subconsciously. The position that feels risky is usually the one that works. Just look at Liquid Death. They could have just been another bottled water brand. So if you want to run your own positioning through the category test and see whether you're still on that spreadsheet, there's a strategic positioning tool I've created for exactly that. It's free, and if there's an opportunity for you to zag while everyone else is digging, it'll give you a bit of a steer in that direction too. The link is at the top of the description. So at the end of the day, the big 4, they're always going to have more people, more reach, a name that precedes them, and they're always going to have been in business maybe even longer than some of your clients have been alive. And they will never be the only logical choice for your specific buyer, but you can be. And only logical choice has nothing to do with price.